Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast, Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional, and I would say that leadership is my passion. I love leading and supporting leaders in their leadership journey.
And I'm Corey, a program manager, emerging leader, and overall leadership enthusiast.
In this Leader Study Series, we're going through the 7 episodes of the 2011 sci-fi show Terra Nova. For each episode, we will deconstruct the leaders and decisions of the characters on the show. Leadership is demonstrated in many different ways, and we're looking forward to talking about the actions, responses, and opportunities to show up as a leader.
Terra Nova aired in 2011, so there will be spoilers in these episodes. Throughout the episodes, we'll talk about emotional intelligence, difficult conversations, building and maintaining trust, and more. Let's jump in.
Okay, we are back with episode 4 of Terra Nova. And this is really interesting because we got to see another side of the Sixers and kind of how they strategically try to leverage Terra Nova and some of their resources. But I will start by passing it over to you. What were some of the things that stood out for you?
I think we've different episodes, different shows that we've talked about so far. We kind of talk about the um, you know, the trust piece within leaders. And what I thought was really interesting about this episode was it was a great example of, trust was like we started with trust, right? So when that young girl shows up at the base and everything, um, there is between Commander Taylor, between Jim, everyone, they trust was there immediately, right? Like they believed what she was saying and there was no issues. And as that episode progressed, like that trust was lost a little bit, but then it wasn't like it was gone forever, right? It was this build thing. And I also thought it was interesting because you had different leaders, differences between Jim, differences between Commander Taylor, about how quickly that trust was either rebuilt or how much that trust was lost. And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic because it also showed why sometimes having multiple almost leadership styles, why that's important, right? Because it helps you get that fuller picture. So that was one of the things that really stuck out to me with this episode.
Yeah, the trust piece between Commander Taylor and it was interesting too, because Jim had more of a, let me talk you through this. Let me, you don't know me. Let me almost like try to convince you as to why I'm trustworthy. And Commander Taylor just acknowledged, like, I'm not the person you think I am, and then followed it up with a lot of strong action. So he was more of a, let me show you that I'm trustworthy through, how I interact with you. Whereas Jim was a little bit, I mean, Jim did show some ways, in action, but he did a lot of the kind of talking and that, like, a lot of that compassion piece where Taylor kind of just took a different approach. And I really, I'm a Commander Taylor fan, so I like his leadership. And so I think that was something, though, that it's like, I don't always have time to convince people that I'm trustworthy. What I can do is demonstrate trustworthy actions and then, let people know that, like, that's how I do it. Because I could say a lot of things, but am I actually trustworthy? I'm going to show you that I am. And so that's what I appreciate about Commander Taylor.
Yeah, that's a really great point too. Especially, there was like a line where Commander Taylor's like, look around at all the people here. They're happy, they're healthy, right? I'm not a bad guy. I'm sure you've heard bad things about me. And it's interesting too because the young girl, I think she's 10 or something, they say in the show, um, you know, there was 3 different types of, I don't want to call it manipulation, but you had Commander Taylor, who's like, you've heard I was a bad guy. Let me show you I'm not a bad guy. You had Jim, who, like you said, is kind of like talking it through, playing the whole, like, I'm going to not shoot straight with you, but, talk through this and those sort of things. And then you had the Sixers group who were kind of using threats and stuff in a way, like, trust me, Commander Taylor's bad, trust, like, they asked her to get some stuff, and the threat there was like, get the stuff or I'll hurt your brother, and she's like, oh, we were never going to hurt her brother, but it was that, like, fear based like leadership style. And I mean, I've dealt with people that, have done that sort of stuff in the past, like, oh, the CEO said that they wanted this tomorrow. We got to get it done. No, they didn't. You know what I mean? The CEO never said that. They said they need it in a week, but you're now leveraging your own timeline on it, putting words in their mouth. And, you know, it reminded me of like that prior military experience of like, oh, we're going to form up for a run or something that's going to start at 8. And so, the next person down says, well, we want to be there by 7:30, and the next person down says 7, and then 6:30, and all of a sudden, you're there, 4 hours before the event actually starts. Um, and so I think it's really interesting because you saw all these different types of it really was trust, right? Like and belief, right? So trust me, this is going to go poorly for you. Trust me, I'm not a bad guy. Trust me because look, I'm telling you everything right now. I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah. I really liked how when the Sixers came for the little girl, Commander Taylor, once again, he did a good job of setting a boundary where he was like with Mira, and he said, you've come to this compound twice, to like aggressively come to us. There won't be a third time. So it's almost like, we get it. Like, I get it. We're upset about things. And so when I think about that, like in the real world, people have bad days, people make mistakes, we're upset about things. You can't keep making the same mistake over and over again. So there has to be a cutoff point. So we talked the first time, we came to an understanding. Right now, there needed to be a trade. Again, we came to another understanding. This ends. We're not going to keep playing this game and doing this over and over again. And so I just appreciated that because I definitely have seen that in my own leadership where sometimes it's like, we've done the niceties and I'm here to be a human leader and have that empathy and that compassion. And also you need to do your stuff. You need to keep up your end of the bargain in this work relationship. So I think that part also just really resonated with me, how he set the boundary. He wasn't unkind about it. He was just like, these are the facts. That's just what it is. This behavior ends.
Yeah, that's such a great point. The other thing that I also thought was interesting was after they found out that the girl was, you know, not, was lying and, went to go steal that box and everything. What I also thought was really interesting was so Commander Taylor's perception changed greatly, right? Towards that little girl. Jim's perception changed as well, but he didn't let Commander Taylor's he still stayed true to his own like moral compass. And his belief was that there was that all, like the little girl was like, "Oh, but they got my brother, so they're going to hurt him if I don't do this stuff." And Commander Taylor was kind of like more along the lines of, how do I know that's true? Right? You lied once, you could lie again. Jim still stayed like he's like my judge of her, and I think he goes back and talks to um like Elizabeth about sort of, I thought I was a good judge of character on this thing. And like he confides in somebody sort of a neutral third party about this, but he didn't let his judgments get too swayed by Commander Taylor's. And I thought that shows a lot of like confidence and good leadership as well too, right? He didn't just toe the line because the boss attitude changed. So I thought that was a really great sort of leadership quality that was highlighted there as well.
I agree. And I also liked the leadership that was displayed on both sides of that. And I think it's also
Yeah.
points to why you need different types of leaders. So Commander Taylor is coming from like a founder's mindset. I am protecting what we're building here. I'm protecting the other people of this colony. Like that is my role. And not to like be all like, Mr. Spock, but it's the whole like, needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Absolutely. And so I think there's that piece. But I think that what you're pointing out here is also something really important where it's like, not everybody in an organization needs to have a founder's mindset. It doesn't mean they're not committed, and it doesn't mean they're not good leaders or that they don't care. It means that it's like, I'm not always going to come at it maybe from the most individual human-centric place because I'm looking at this whole big thing. And that person could be the CEO or not. In this case, he kind of, is the leader of the colony, but you can have people who have a founder's mindset at all different levels. And so I think that, yeah, there's that need for that balance though of, yes, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to drive this thing forward. It creates jobs. It, in this colony, it holds people's livelihood. It does all of that. And then someone else who's like, but if we just could take a step back and like, just think about it from this person's perspective, that she's a kid who's doing this. She's being used as a pawn, essentially, no matter what it is, it's still a kid. So being used as a pawn, and they gave us the most sympathetic person that we would like. There's a reason for that. Like, this kid does have a story. It does have something that needs to be heard. So I think that's where that, like, the people who kind of help us all stay inclusive. And I don't necessarily mean that in like a DEI way, although that's very important, but just that way of being like, but maybe there is a one-off, right? Maybe this is the one-off that really matters. And like, not saying change it, but I am saying look at it. But I also really like the point that you made where you have to be able to speak that kind of truth to power. You have to be able to be confident as a leader and be confident in how you're bringing this to the other person, have that psychological safety between you and that other person, which Jim and Commander Taylor do have, to be able to say, also just like, look at this other perspective. And Taylor, what I appreciate about him, I appreciate this about Jim too. I'm going to make a decision, but I'm open to other perspectives. I'm open to being persuaded. Like, tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, such great points. And I also think when Jim, not to push too far ahead, but also when Jim went out looking, right, was like, I kind of think that this brother guy exists, and Commander Taylor was sort of like, we don't know. I'm not gonna spend resources, like you said, that founder's mindset. I'm not gonna, needs the many versus the few. So Jim sort of takes it upon himself a little bit to go out there and try to look and find the boy. So, and then Jim gets, kind of captured or whatever by the Sixers. And he's having a conversation, and what I think is really interesting about him is, he doesn't necessarily overshare, but when they're like, "What are you doing here? Why'd you come?" He's like, "Hey, look, I'm just looking for the boy, right? The girl said this," and then he talks about, he sort of says, "Oh, what's so important about that box that the girl was trying to steal?" Which, I guess I don't know. I hope I'm never captured by a rogue group on a dinosaur planet, but like, I would have probably kept that to myself. You know what I mean? But Jim sort of shares that to be like, look, I'm not like naive to what's going on here. We can kind of cut the game. I'm being open with you, right? So like, it came back to that trust thing. I'm trusting that you understand that I know what you're doing. And I thought that was a really interesting interaction, because so far it seems like, with like you said, when Commander Taylor is interacting with the Sixers and they're interacting with him or whatever, everybody is still very like professional in a way. Like, it's not super emotionally driven. And I think that's where there's like this effective communication, and there's not these big fights or anything. And I think that's like, that really sticks out to me about this show, is that there's still a sort of a business mindset behind those negotiations. Like you said, Commander Taylor being like, "You've done this twice. There's not going to be a third time." So he was very clear with that. And even with this interaction with Jim and like the Sixers, where they're like, "We were never going to hurt the boy," that kind of thing. Like, they're being very point blank with it all. And so I thought that was, yeah, really, really, really interesting.
I like that you brought it back to that trust piece, because I think that was also another reason why Jim did give them more information. Like, I want to build enough trust with you that you give me what I need.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something in that too, where it's kind of like when you're talking to people in whether it's a different role or different levels of an organization, you tell them what they need to know and nothing else, right? They don't need all the details, or at different levels, they don't need all the details if they don't need to execute on those details. Tell them what they need to know and nothing else, and get out of there. So but again, and that's how you build relationships at those different levels. That way they don't think that you're just some like long-winded blowhard who's just trying to give them all this stuff where they're like literally not at my level to take action on. Like, I can do nothing with that. Thank you, but I can't do anything with that. So I think that's why it was also Jim did it in a really smart way where it was like, yep, I'm going to tell you told me this and I'm going to tell you that. And we are having this exchange so that as we're building this trust, it feels fair and it feels balanced.
Yeah, I also thought what was really like, yes, agree with everything. The other thing I think that was really great about Jim was as the Sixers were saying things that ran counter to what I believe Jim's beliefs are about Commander Taylor not being liked by people in the past or the future, or however you want to look at it, right? Back from the real Earth, if you will. Um, and that so that he wasn't great and people didn't like him, and that people didn't want this to be a new foundation, and there hasn't been many details given about that. Jim didn't say like you're a liar or I don't believe that or anything. He didn't shut that conversation down. He accepted it as being another piece of information. And what I also thought was he didn't, for whatever reason, right, when he gets back to Terra Nova, he's fine, safe, that whole thing. Um, and Commander Taylor's like, hey, did she say anything to you uh, that I should know about? He didn't share that information, right? Because I think one, he's taking it as a new data source and wants to, prove it for himself. But I think that it's like kind of like what you were talking about. There's no reason to bring that worry up or to strain his relationship with Commander Taylor over something that somebody who very clearly has a bias against him would say, right? So it's like I thought that that also showed a lot of really great restraint. Again, he wasn't lying. It wasn't like he was omitting truth so much as just saying, "Hey, she said she doesn't like you." You know what I mean? Which was what it was, and the details don't need to be added in to muddy that.
And also it's that professional piece essentially of I'm not here to play he said she said middle school BS game, right? Like
Yeah,
he's Taylor's aware that the Sixers are not his biggest fans.
yeah,
We don't need to waste more time making that clear to him. He's clear. He's got it. He's accepted that feedback. So yeah, so just again, like you said, he doesn't need to go into the details. And I like what you said earlier too about there's not as much like quarreling or fighting within the groups or within the in groups. And I think it goes to that piece of everyone in Terra Nova has a job and a place that's so specific. That's how they're contributing. They understand how they're contributing to the larger mission. They understand why they're there. And I think that that's also on teams when you see productive conflict, it's actually moving things forward where people are disagreeing with each other's ideas and all of that. But at its very core, everyone on a team needs to understand their place. And I don't mean that in like a hierarchy way, but what am I bringing to the table here? What does success look like? How am I making an impact? And when you can really help people see and understand that, there is less conflict, less unnecessary conflict, where it's not like, oh, this person's in my lane because of this. And it's like, oh, well, this is where we Venn diagram, right? And you work together because you both, are part of supporting the same population. So I think that, yeah, that everyone has like a place in a really positive way of, I know what I'm contributing here. So what Jim is doing, what Elizabeth is doing, that's great. And that's fine. They're contributing in their ways too. So there's less of that need for argument or disagreement and those like unnecessary ones.
yeah. But yeah, no, that's the removing of the unnecessary, I think, arguments or anything that just muddy up getting the point through is big. And I think the other thing too with Jim is, you know, if we approach Commander Taylor as having that founder's mindset and his goal is to keep the organization safe and everything, I think Jim also realizes that if there is any truth to or if there's a perceived threat to the organization and he shares that with Commander Taylor, like, oh, these people don't like you and they don't want that, it's just going to create more conflict because now Commander Taylor's going to view the Sixers as sort of like less of this rogue group, and maybe now it's a direct threat to the safety of Terra Nova. So it's I think that, yeah, I just think it was like a lot of wise restraint from him, right? From
Yeah.
Jim.
Well, and again, with back to Taylor, like I said, he already knows the Sixers aren't fans, and he's already set a boundary, right? He's already set a boundary with a warning that like this ends here. So they can make whatever choice they want. They can choose to be a direct threat, which they have twice, which is why he's like, hey, knock that off. Or, he could choose to get all flustered about it. But I think that's another big piece too, where it's like Taylor is confident enough in himself as a leader and in the decisions that he makes. And when I say that too, it's like he also knows how to use the resources that he has. He knows how to have he is confident in all these like kind of skills of leadership, so that it's like no matter what happens, even when the Sixers decide to come over and try to take over Terra Nova, we have next steps. We have fought off dinosaurs. This is going to be fine, right? Like, I think there's also a confidence that it doesn't even come with age. It just comes with like a lot, like some experience, of course, but also the type of content that you're intaking and how you reflect on different experiences that make a person who's like, yep, even when all this stuff goes sideways, that doesn't change who I am as a leader, and I will continue to move forward and lead this group.
Yeah, no, that, like I said, that those were the big things really for me this episode. I think that stuck out. The only other one that I thought was interesting was, um, when Jim and Elizabeth were sort of talking through about the girl and being like, "Oh, I thought we had a better judge of character." I think what was again interesting was um, Elizabeth's sort of reaction was, "I don't like the idea of people like taking advantage of our kindness." And Jim, he agreed with that, but that wasn't his biggest thing was that he, misread the situation, right? That was the thing that like bothered him the most. And then with Commander Taylor, it was, you know, I trusted, and then that trust was betrayed. So that's where we are. So again, you saw like three, I think, very normal reactions um to that break of trust. And I think what's interesting is I think all three of them, they all could have felt the way that the other two felt had they been, it comes down to where your interaction starts, right? In that relationship. So it's like, I think it's interesting if multiple people already trust and you trust with that, how does that affect you? But the whole trust thing was really interesting to me in this episode.
Absolutely. And I like that you pointed out like these three different approaches, because also it's valuable for us to remember that, like as leaders, where when trust is eroded, it impacts people differently, right? They
Yeah.
take it internally in ways where it's like, of course, we didn't mean it that way, I hope, right? Like most people don't mean to, erode trust in a way that it's like, I'm trying to hurt you psychologically. Like, no. However, like people's past, people's, other experiences, people's relationship with you, all of that impacts where it's like, oh, are you taking advantage of my kindness? Right. So it's kind of like that external thing, or it's, the Jim thing where it's like, I did something wrong here. Like I didn't read into something. And then the Taylor who's like, I give you trust. And now that it has been eroded, it will take work. It will take a different type of effort to get back to that level. But if you think about that, even whether it's trust or any other thing, like people will sometimes take things upon themselves. They'll push it to the other person, or they'll just try to like break ties and kind of Heisman it a bit, whatever the situation is, trust or anything else. So also, again, as leaders, I know I love to start by saying that, but like as leaders to really think, what is it that is like people are going to, all people are going to take this differently. I can't make sure every person feels the same way all the time, of course, but just knowing that like these are the different aspects that I'll probably have to deal with. And also be aware, like when someone comes to you and tells you something like that, like, oh, okay, this person's giving me great information about them. Kind of like you're saying, Jim, this like, oh, here's another source of information about you that I can use to strengthen this relationship later.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was all the stuff I had for this episode too. And again, it was another really good one. I like that they give them these different things where it can sometimes feel like, yes, this could be a threat to the colony. It's also a little bit of an ethical dilemma and kind of like how they resolve these things. And I really enjoyed just the difference between Commander Taylor and Jim. But I also really like that we see a lot of Elizabeth and how she really weighs in and adds this other perspective to all these different things. So there are things that she comes up with sometimes that like Taylor and Jim hadn't thought of, but then she brings it, but they also listen to her. So I like that it's this cool kind of dynamic of Terra Nova.